My name is William Grant, and my wife Cindy and our twin children, Mike and Lindy, who are 15 years old, live in the ranch house that my grandparents left me just outside the little town of Justin, which is about 50 miles from Fort Worth off Route 20. Cindy and I have been best friends since we were both 10 years old. We grew up together and did everything together until Cindy went to college to study art and history. Meanwhile, I started working for my father in the construction business, where we built and renovated all sorts of things. Most of our work was contracted by the local government to build and take care of public buildings like schools and libraries. We also did a lot of work for the local Air Force base. Let me tell you a bit about Cindy and me. My parents were not rich, but we managed just fine. My dad ran the construction business, and my mom took care of the books and looked after me and my little sister Karen. I was a late bloomer and didn't fully grow until I was in my late teens. Even then, I was only 5 Ashen and 180 pounds. My dad believed that I couldn't lead a construction crew unless they respected me, and since we employed some ex-convicts, he thought it was important for me to learn how to defend myself. That's when he introduced me to his company supervisor, Patrick. William, this is Patrick, my supervisor. He ensures that the men behave themselves at work, and if they give him any trouble, he handles it. Patrick used to be in the military, so nobody dares to cross him. He will teach you how to take care of yourself for 1 hour every night. And so, my journey with Patrick began. It was tough and sometimes painful, but I learned how to fight and defend myself. My mom would fuss over me every time I came home with a cut lip or a bruise. Cindy, on the other hand, came from a wealthy family that didn't approve of our friendship. They tried to separate us, but it only made us more determined to stay friends. Things changed one night when Cindy went to a party and ended up having too much to drink or possibly had something slipped into her drink. I had just finished my lesson with Patrick when my phone rang. It was Cindy's number, but it turned out to be one of her friends, Pam. "Bill, can you come here as quickly as possible? Cindy is out of it, and a couple of guys are trying to get her into their car. I think they might want to harm her. I've called the campus police, but nobody is answering. Just tell me where you are, and I'll be there as soon as I can. Don't let them leave." She told me the address, and I rushed to the scene. When I arrived, there was a commotion outside the frat house. Cindy's friend was standing in front of a car, refusing to move. 2 guys were trying to pull her away so that they could drive off. As they moved her aside, I blocked their path with my truck. I quickly got out, ran to the side of the vehicle, and peered inside. There, I saw Cindy lying across the back seat, and one of the guys had his hand inappropriately on her. I immediately pulled him out of the car and kicked him in his sensitive area. He squealed in pain. Then, I took the keys and threw them across the street. As I looked up, I saw 2 more guys approaching me. I swiftly knocked down the first one with a strike to his throat with my knuckles. The second one took a swing at me, but I easily dodged it. I grabbed his arm and pulled it, causing him to lose balance. He fell to the ground, and before he could get back up, I kicked him twice where it hurts the most. And just then, a campus police car arrived with the lights flashing. They took the 3 guys into custody after taking statements. Pam and I helped Cindy into my truck, and together we took her home. Cindy's father was furious with me initially, blaming me for her state, and was about to hit me when Pam stepped in and explained what had really happened. As soon as Cindy's father understood, he calmed down and even apologized. Both Cindy's parents thanked me for saving their daughter from harm. After that incident, I had a much better relationship with her parents, and they even invited me to dinner and introduced me to some of their friends as Cindy's hero. Cindy and I started dating more seriously, and after 6 months, I proposed to her. We got married the following year. Cindy was an amazing wife, except for one thing: she always felt that we never had enough money. She came from a wealthy background, and all her friends were rich, but we lived on what I earned. I was slowly renovating the house, but not as quickly as Cindy wanted. We would often argue about money. Why didn't my dad pay me more? When would the house be finished? Cindy would often go out with her rich friends, and although I was invited once or twice, they would always make it a point to brag about their wealth compared to ours, so I stopped going. That suited me just fine because it allowed me to focus on the house. Although I worked for my dad's construction company, I was passionate about engineering. I loved taking things apart and figuring out how they worked. So, I decided to go back to college and take night courses at a community college. Eventually, I earned my bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. I continued to work for my dad's company but built a small workshop next to the house. I bought some used equipment like a lathe, drill, and milling machine. This came in handy when one of our machines broke down and we couldn't find replacement parts. I took it apart and made new parts with some improvements of my own. The machine ended up working even better than before, and my dad rewarded me with a bonus. I spent my time in the workshop redesigning a diesel pump and applying for a patent. Over the next few years, I designed and built several other inventions, mainly injectors and pumps, which were all awaiting patent approval. When our children were born, Cindy became a stay-at-home mom. She was an excellent mother and a loving wife. Our love life was great. This continued until the children started going to school, and Cindy began feeling bored. One night, after the children had gone to bed, Cindy came and sat on my lap and hugged me deeply. This usually meant we were about to be close or that she wanted something. Bill, now that the kids are in school, I thought I could get a job at the local school as an art and history teacher. The extra money would be really helpful. Where is all this coming from? I was talking to one of the other mothers who's married to the principal, and she told me they were looking for a new history teacher as the current one is pregnant and will be leaving soon. We could use the extra money for the house renovations. This sounded like a good idea to me, and the fact that she would have less free time to spend with her rich friends was a bonus. So, I agreed. Everything went smoothly for the next decade. Cindy would take the kids to school and start working. At the end of the day, she would bring them home and start cooking dinner. I would arrive home about an hour later, eat, do some household chores, watch TV with the family, and then go to bed. Our love life slowed down to once or twice a week, mostly on weekends. I didn't mind too much because I was often tired from work, and Cindy felt the same. However, there was still a part of Cindy that wanted more. I had almost finished the renovations on the house, transforming it from a simple 3-bedroom ranch house to a 2-story, 5-bedroom ranch house. I was now working on installing a swimming pool. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, Cindy came and sat on my lap. Just like before, she wanted something. She had seen an advertisement in the local newspaper for an art gallery manager position that paid almost double her current salary. She wanted to apply. Knowing how much she loved art, I agreed. She applied for the job, went for an interview, and waited. When I came home from work on that day, Cindy ran up to me, excitedly saying, "I got it. I got it." After trying to regain my balance from her enthusiasm, I asked, "Got what?" "The job, silly. I am the new manager of the art gallery they are building on Main Street." I, of course, was thrilled for her, and we went out for dinner to celebrate. Cindy had to go to Dallas for a 2-week training course before starting her new job. Since it was a new gallery, Cindy was responsible for organizing all the exhibits with her coworkers. She had told me she had met the owner, Paul Gauthier, who owned many galleries throughout the US and Europe and was very successful. He was going to attend the grand opening on Saturday. On Saturday, I was dressed in my only suit, feeling confident. I was waiting at the bottom of the stairs when Cindy came down. I couldn't help but be taken aback. She was wearing a dress that showed a little too much skin. "Wow, Cindy, you look great, but that dress is a bit revealing." "Where did you get it?" "Paul got it for me. He said I should look good on opening night." "Do you like it?" "Yes, I do, but it makes you look a bit too flashy. Also, it bothers me that you went shopping with another man without telling me." "Did he also pick out your clothes?" "Actually, he did. Do you like it?" And she lifted her dress provocatively. I was angry and let her know. "Go back to the bedroom and change into a more decent pair of clothes. Otherwise, we're not going anywhere." She stormed back into the bedroom and came back a few minutes later, showing me a different but still very small pair of clothes. "Are you satisfied now?" she shouted at me, then went to her car. "Well, don't just stand there, get in." Cindy drove us to the gallery using her car. I didn't like driving it because it felt small compared to my truck, but it was her car, so I went along with it. We arrived early so that she could greet the guests as they arrived. When we entered, I saw a tall, handsome man waiting for us. Cindy introduced him as Paul, her boss. To my surprise, Cindy left my side and stood next to Paul, who put his arm around her. Before I could say anything, Cindy was called away to attend to something with her coworkers. I was furious. Then another man, who looked rather unpleasant, came over to talk to Paul. He introduced him as Max, his bodyguard. As the evening went on, I saw less and less of Cindy. When I realized I had been sitting alone for over an hour, I went to look for her. I found her standing and talking to a couple about a painting, with Paul standing close to her, his hand on her shoulder. It seemed like they were a couple. I couldn't help myself and confronted Cindy, removing Paul's hand. "Don't touch what isn't yours, all right?" He looked at me and smirked before walking away. Cindy turned to me and almost shouted, "How dare you embarrass me like that? We were just talking." "You mean you were just talking?" It seemed like he was getting too close. "Don't be ridiculous. Stop acting like a child. I don't need your protection anymore." As soon as she said it, she realized she had gone too far but didn't back down, even though she knew she was in the wrong. "Well, in that case, since you've been ignoring me all evening, I'm going home. See you later." With that, I walked out and took a cab home. Cindy came home after midnight, but I was already in bed pretending to be asleep. The next morning, she gave me the silent treatment. I didn't care. I went fishing and had a nice quiet day. When I got home, she had gone to pick up the kids from her parents' house and didn't return until after 8. We had dinner at Mom's. I hope you had something to eat. I'm going to shower and go to bed early. She went upstairs and I heard the water running. I told the kids to get ready for bed since they had school the next day. The next 2 weeks were no better. We hardly spoke and definitely had no intimacy. On the third Saturday, Cindy came home and said she wanted to talk. "Look, Bill, I know you were upset with me for how I acted at the gallery opening, but there's no need. Paul would like to make it up to us. He invited us to spend the weekend at his cabin by the lake. There will be 2 other couples there, and we can have a BBQ and go out on his boat. You could even go fishing. What do you say?" I could see this was important to her, so I agreed. The following Saturday, we dropped off the kids at my parents' place and drove up to Paul's cabin in our truck. Calling it a cabin didn't do it justice. It was a 5-bedroom house right by the lake with no neighbors in sight. I soon discovered there was no cell phone service, only a landline and a computer link. 3 other vehicles were outside, all 4-wheel drives, as the road leading to the cabin was rough. Paul, Max, and the 2 other couples, Tom and Margaret, and Phil and Susan, greeted us at the door. We exchanged greetings, but I noticed the other couples avoided making eye contact with me. It made me suspicious, and I felt that something wasn't right. We had a BBQ that afternoon, and Tom and Phil invited me to go fishing. Cindy said she wouldn't mind, so I agreed. We took a boat across the lake, and as we went further, I realized we couldn't see the cabin anymore. It made me wonder if this was intentional. We fished for most of the afternoon, and when it started getting late, I suggested we head back. Tom and Phil seemed a bit uneasy but agreed. As we approached the jetty, I noticed that Cindy, Paul, and Max were not in sight. However, Margaret and Susan were sitting and reading. As soon as we tied up the boat, I went over to the wives and asked where Cindy was. They wouldn't look at me and simply said she went for a walk with Paul. Susan pointed to the right when I asked which way they went. I was furious. Instead of walking in that direction, I went into the house but left through the front entrance, making it seem like I hadn't left. Instead, I walked parallel to the path for about 50 feet. After half a mile, I saw Max sitting on a log, smoking. He didn't notice me, so I continued for another 100 yards until I heard voices. I crept up silently and was shocked by what I witnessed. Paul was leaning against a tree, and my wife, Cindy, was in front of him. I took out my phone and discreetly took several pictures and a short video. My marriage was over, and it was time for revenge. I made my way back to the cabin, went into our bedroom, and started thinking. After about an hour, I heard Cindy's voice, and she came into the room. "Hi, Bill. You're back early. I didn't expect you until it was dark. Did you have any luck fishing?" "Not really, but I did see some deer. When we got back, I thought I'd catch up with you on your walk, but I must have missed you." "Did you enjoy your walk?" Cindy didn't answer, but she looked guilty and avoided eye contact with me before going into the dining room. I followed shortly after. We all sat down for dinner, which was prepared by Margaret and Susan. As we ate, I noticed that the other couples couldn't meet my gaze, and whenever I looked at Max or Paul, They had smirks on their faces. I realized that something was going to happen that night. After dinner, while the two women were clearing up, I took a moment to assess the situation. I realized that if I sat with my back to the front door, I could see the reflection of what was behind me in the glass door of the cabinet across the room. I also put my phone in my top pocket, set on record. I had a feeling I might need it as evidence later. After a while, we all sat down at the table except for Max, who sat behind me and to the left. I could clearly see him in the reflection. Cindy stood up and announced that it was getting late, mentioning that she would be spending the night with Paul. She said it would only be one night, and the next day we could act as if nothing had happened. I stood there, thinking, who is this woman? So you invited us here so that you could seduce my wife and rub it in my face. Instead of Paul answering, Tom spoke up. Look, Bill, things aren't as bad as you think. Paul has this thing where he likes to seduce married women while their husbands are present. He gets some sort of thrill knowing that the husbands can hear them being intimate. Afterward, he's a good friend and helps out however he can. You and Cindy can continue as if nothing ever happened. Please don't make a scene, or Max will get aggressive, like I've seen him do with other husbands who upset him. Tell me, Tombe, did Paul do this to you and Phil? They looked at their feet, and the two women appeared guilty. Well, that's all the answer I need. And you still associate with him? You should be ashamed of yourselves. Cindy interrupted. Bill, stop acting like a child. It's only one night. Besides, Paul has put $200,000 in our joint account for this. Why, Cindy? Why do this when you know I'll divorce you the moment we get home? First, Bill, you can't afford to divorce me. I'll take your company, your 401k, the house, and half of our savings. I'll also turn our children against you. You'll have to pay child and spousal support while I have relationships at your expense. And as for why, look at Paul. He's successful, tall, good-looking, and obviously the alpha male. Meanwhile, you're struggling and barely 5 feet 10 inches a beta male. What woman wouldn't want a night with him? Actually, he's nothing more than a deceitful opportunist that charms married women so that he can embarrass their husbands, and that's what he enjoys. He's lower than dirt. As I was talking, I was watching Max in the reflection from the china cabinet. He had moved to stand behind me, and as I finished my angry speech against Paul, he swung his gun round at my head. I dropped to one knee, swiveled round, and punched him in the stomach. He dropped his gun and clutched his groin in pain. As I stood up, I grabbed his hair and pulled him down onto my knee, breaking his nose as he fell to the floor. I kicked him in the stomach to keep him down. I walked over to his gun and picked it up. When I looked over at the others, I saw 6 shocked faces looking back at me. So much for your bodyguard, Paul. I pointed the gun at Paul. Where would you like it? I thought maybe one in each shoulder and knee, or one in the gut. It takes a long time to die from that, and I've heard it's very painful. Or should I just shoot you between the eyes and get it over with? As I watched the not-so-happy couple, I noticed a dark stain spreading down Paul's leg. Oh, look, the alpha male's wet himself. Now who's the alpha male? I cocked the gun. I asked you a question. You are. Please don't shoot me. I'm sorry, there's no harm done. Shut up. Tom, go to my truck in the toolbox behind the cab. You'll find a bag with ties in it. Bring it in. Tom returned a few minutes later, and I used zip ties to restrain Max's hands and feet, then put him in the corner. Okay, let's play truth or die. I will ask the questions, and if you tell me the truth, you get to live. You first, Paul. When did you first have relations with my wife? Paul looked at me, and I thought he might start crying, but then he smirked and spoke. The night of the opening, after the others left, we went into the back office, and Cindy pleased me for a few minutes, and I engaged in physical relations with her on the desk. I even engaged in anal relations, something you never did. Well, I don't begrudge you that, as I have never liked doing that anyway. And how many times have you engaged in such relations since, including the favor she gave you in the forest this afternoon? In the past 3 weeks, I have engaged in those relations with her nearly every day, either in the office or back at my hotel. Margaret, how often have you engaged in relations with Paul since he humiliated your husband? She just looked at the floor and shuffled her feet. Okay, Paul, how often have you engaged in relations with Margaret and Susan? Whenever I visited their gallery, usually in my hotel room. Sometimes I even let Max engage in relations with them as well. They're individuals who are overly enthusiastic about such activities. I heard a loud smack. As I turned to look at Phil, I saw Susan fly off her chair and lay still on the floor. That terrible woman told me it was just the one time I hope I broke her nose. And with that, he went into his bedroom, slamming the door. I looked at Tom, who was looking at his wife like she had just crawled out of nowhere. Margaret just sat there with tears running down her face. Tom looked at Paul in disgust. "You awful person. I thought you were our friend." "Well, you can have her. I never want to see her again, awful person." As he walked past her to his bedroom, he slapped her round the head, causing her to fall off the chair. "You..." I looked at Paul and Cindy. "Well, Cindy, you have now decided to engage in those activities as a profession. How does that feel?" "What? I'm not a..." "Why would you say that? Paul has given you $200,000 to engage in those activities with him all night. That's money for such activities, which is the definition of what you mentioned. Congratulations, you've upgraded yourself. Now you've been paid, so you might as well go into his bedroom and earn your fee. Both of you, go on and enjoy yourselves. Because come morning, Cindy, you will have to find somewhere else to live." "Don't look so smug, Paul, because when Tom and Phil realize you have no one to protect you, I wouldn't like to be in your shoes. Now that's settled, I'm going home to pack. Goodbye, Cindy, and good riddance." "Cindy, wait, Bill, what about me? How do I get home? Please don't leave me. I made a mistake, can't we at least talk about it?" "A mistake is when you make a small error, like burning dinner. What you did was deliberate. You were happy to see me get hurt by Max so that you could engage in those activities with that person and humiliate me in the process." "Well, how did that work out for you? You engaged in those activities with him multiple times and even engaged in one in the forest. I have it on video and will send it to all your friends and family. Have a nice day and suffer the consequences, you terrible person." I left them standing there in a puddle of his urine and went out to my truck. I took my pocket knife out of the glove box and cut the valve stems off of all the cars. I then disassembled the gun and threw the parts into the lake. Next, I cut the phone lines so that they couldn't call for help and would have to walk the 2 miles back to the main road. And just in case they found another way to get help using the boat, I broke the ignition key in the lock. I got into my truck and drove up to the main road, heading home. As soon as I had reception on my cell phone, I called my parents and asked them to prepare the children for a trip. When they asked why, I gave them a shortened version of what had happened. When my mom asked if it was possible to reconcile with Cindy for the sake of the children, I sent them the recordings I had made. My parents were shocked at the depth of Cindy's betrayal and agreed to help me in any way they could. I then called my friend Frank, who owned a used car dealership, and asked him to meet me at my house with a trailer. We arrived at about the same time, and I explained what I needed and why. He insisted on seeing the recordings and asked for a copy to show his wife Norma, who happened to be Cindy's best friend. I agreed and gave him a copy. I asked Frank to remove all of Cindy's belongings and put them in trash bags in the back of her car, then move her car far away from the house. In the meantime, I packed all my belongings and the children's clothes and possessions into my truck. I removed the hard drive from my computer, emptied the safe and the gun safe. All my tools and equipment went into Frank's trailer for safekeeping. I spent the next half an hour sorting out our finances, taking all the joint savings and leaving only the $200,000 Cindy earned. I paid off the credit cards and canceled them, leaving only her checking account and debit card. I also had all my mail forwarded to my parents' address using the post office website. Then, I set fire to the house. The house couldn't be seen from the town, so nobody would call the fire department. By morning, it would be reduced to ashes. Good luck living there, you unfaithful person. I then emailed everyone on Cindy's laptop and phone, sending the video I had taken with a note saying, "This is why I left Cindy." A few days before, I had seen a motorhome on Frank's lot and asked if it was still available for purchase. He agreed, and we set off to his garage. He gave me a great deal on my old truck and agreed to keep it hidden from sight, as the police would be looking for a truck and not my new motorhome. Frank suggested that I also buy a trailer and an old Jeep Wrangler to attach to it, so that I would have transportation when parked with the motor home. I thought it was a fantastic idea, but I couldn't afford everything just yet. He told me not to worry and that we would sort it out later. We transferred all my belongings from my truck to the motorhome. I said my goodbyes and set off for my parents' house. When I arrived, my dad came out to inspect the motorhome I was driving and gave me a questioning look. I explained that I needed a head start so that my wife wouldn't be able to keep the children away from me. I went into the house and sat with my children, trying to explain what had happened. They didn't want Cindy and I to separate and started crying. I explained that we would never be together again, but I would let them choose who to live with. Reluctantly, I showed them the recordings of their mother and Paul disrespecting me, as well as the threats Cindy made about turning them against me. After many tears, they both wanted to stay with me. We loaded the rest of their belongings into the motorhome, said tearful goodbyes to my parents, and set off to an unknown destination. I wanted to get out of the state as quickly and as far away as possible before Cindy could cause more trouble. I drove all night, only stopping to buy fuel and a few necessities. After crossing the state line, I drove for a couple more hours, desperately searching for a campsite. I was growing tired and nearly fell asleep at the wheel, needing to slap myself to stay awake. I almost missed the sign for the campsite. I took the turn a bit too fast and almost tipped the trailer. The adrenaline woke me up, and I stayed alert for the next 2 miles until reaching the campsite. I pulled into a mostly empty site and parked, then collapsed onto the bunk bed and fell asleep as soon as my head hit the pillow. Cindy, after Bill left, I looked at Paul in a different light. He no longer interested me, and his appearance reflected defeat. I looked at the mess he was standing in and felt nothing but disgust. What had I done? Bill had always treated me well. He was a kind and caring partner, and I couldn't complain. He was a great father, much better than I was a mother. He did everything with the kids, helped them with their homework, attended their sports events, and took them out on weekends. Meanwhile, I was always too busy, so why did I throw it all away for Paul and some second-rate experience? I couldn't bring myself to spend the night with Paul, but he wasn't getting his money back. I had already earned that. Now, I needed to focus on repairing my marriage. I would use the children as a tool to bring Bill back to me. As I started to drift off to sleep, I heard shouting. I rushed to the door and saw Tom and Phil yelling at Paul. Before I knew it, Phil struck Paul, knocking him off his chair. Both husbands began kicking him. I watched for a moment, but then realized they might seriously harm him, so I tried to intervene. I positioned myself between them, begging them to stop before they killed Paul. They ignored me, and one of them accidentally hit me, causing me to fall. It was then they realized the severity of their actions. They helped me up and apologized. We lifted Paul and guided him to bed. Around the same time, I remembered Max and set him free, putting him to bed. We all eventually settled into our own beds, though sleep was hard to come by. In the morning, we prepared to leave when Phil discovered that all the car tires were flat. Our landline wasn't working, and no one had cell service. I couldn't even find my phone. Bill must have taken it. Phil and Tom decided to walk to the main road to find a ride into town. That left Paul, Margaret, Susan, Max, and me alone in the cabin. Everyone looked beaten and bruised, with Paul appearing the worst. He could barely walk, and his pride seemed utterly deflated. He had gone from a confident alpha male to a defeated soul in less than 24 hours. I almost felt sorry for him until I remembered that he had caused the downfall of several marriages, including mine. After what felt like an eternity, a tow truck arrived with Phil and Tom to fix the cars. It took the entire morning to get us back on the road. I asked Tom for a ride home as I didn't want to arrive in Paul's car and set Bill off even more. As we neared our driveway, tears welled up in my eyes. Our house was a pile of charred ruins. I stepped out of the car and approached the remnants, only then noticing that my car was parked a safe distance away. I walked over and saw what I assumed were my belongings and trash bags. The keys were in the ignition, and the car started right up. I thanked Tom for bringing me home, and he drove off. I headed back to town and stopped at a gas station to buy a cheap phone. However, when I went to pay for it, I discovered my credit card no longer worked. I tried my debit card, and it worked fine. I attempted to call Bill, but the number was blocked. Next, I tried Bill's parents, and his mom answered. "Hi, Grace, it's Cindy. Have you seen Bill? We had an argument, and he stormed off and won't take my calls. Yes, Cindy. He told us what you did and showed us the video. We're really disappointed in you, so please don't call us again. With that, she hung up. I tried calling Norma, and she answered on the fourth ring. Hi, Norma. It's Cindy. Have you seen Bill? We had an argument, and he walked out. Hardly surprising, considering what you did to him. Don't act surprised I've seen the video. Why would you even think Bill would tolerate that? Everyone you call knows what you did because Bill sent the video to everyone you know, including your parents. So don't expect any sympathy from them. Do you realize that your marriage is over and you might not see your kids again? What do you mean? Bill took the kids and left. I have no idea where he went, so don't ask. Now, if you don't mind, I have a family to look after. Goodbye. I sat there in shock, taking in the enormity of my situation. I had no home, no husband, no children, no friends, and my family probably wouldn't speak to me. Then I remembered that my credit card no longer worked. In a panic, I fired up my laptop and checked my bank account. All I had was the $200,000 that Paul had paid me the day before and a few $100s in my checking account. Desperately, I transferred the $200. 000 to my checking account. At least I now had enough money to get by for the foreseeable future. I checked into a no-tell motel and paid for a few nights' stay. As I sat on the bed and looked in the mirror, tears streamed down my face. I had never felt more alone and frightened in my entire life. Bill, I was awakened by my children, who needed breakfast. I went to the camp shop, paid for 2 nights of parking, and gathered some supplies. When I returned to the RV, the kids already had water boiling, so I made myself a coffee and prepared breakfast for all of us. We had Cheerios, waffles with syrup, milk for the kids, and strong coffee for me. After breakfast, I felt better, though I still felt saddened by the end of my marriage. I couldn't do much about the divorce on a Sunday, but I planned to see my attorney on Monday. I fed the kids, unloaded the Jeep, and we set off for my parents' house. I explained to them that I needed to see my attorney in the afternoon and asked if they could look after the kids. They were more than happy to help. I arrived at my attorney's office at 3 p.m. and explained the situation to him, including the steps I had taken to protect myself financially. He agreed that I had made the right choices and maintained distance from the money. Our conversation continued as follows. Bill, are you sure about getting a divorce? You could risk losing custody of the kids. It would be good for you to encourage regular contact between the kids and their mother to show goodwill. Let me worry about that. Don't ask questions you don't want answers to. I want to hurt her just as much as she hurt me, so go all out. I want a complete destruction, leave no stone unturned. Oh, and by the way, she admitted on the video that she was paid $200, 000 for participating. How about you talk to your friend, the district attorney, and have her charged with engaging in illegal activities? That's quite severe, but I like it. I'll have a word. This might get expensive, are you sure? Money isn't an issue. My parents assured me they would cover the costs. You're protected. Okay, Bill, when do you want her served? The gallery has an open evening on Thursday. It would be perfect if she were served then, preferably when the place is packed with all those stuck-up individuals. Yes, I can arrange that. I can also bring an alienation of affection claim against Gauthier and argue that they failed to enforce morality clauses specified in your wife's contract. I'm not sure how far it will go, but it will certainly embarrass them in front of their guests. That sounds perfect. Do it. How can we stay in touch? For instructions or face-to-face conversations, I'll provide you with my email and Facebook information. For any paperwork, send it to my parents and they'll make sure it gets to me. I left my attorney's office feeling like I was finally taking steps towards revenge. When I reached my parents' house to pick up the kids, my mom suggested we stay the night since it was a long drive back to the campsite. I agreed, and we enjoyed a wonderful home-cooked meal. The next morning, after breakfast, I told the children to call their mother and let her know they were safe. They used their social media to make the call, and she answered promptly. Hi, my babies. How are you? Is Daddy there? Hi, Mom. Yes, he's here, but he doesn't want to talk to you. We called to let you know that we're okay. Thank you both. It's really nice to see and talk to you. Where are you? Not entirely sure. Why do you ask? You never cared about where we were before, as long as we were out of your way. Baby, that's not true. I've always loved you, even if I didn't always show it. You mean like how you loved Dad and then hurt him? We can do without that kind of love. Anyway, we called you because Dad told us to, otherwise we wouldn't have bothered Mom. Cindy sat there and cried. Her once perfect life had crumbled before her eyes, all because she wanted more. Monday, Cindy went to work as usual and opened the gallery. Everything seemed normal, though she half expected Paul to visit for their usual lunchtime routine. She wondered how he would treat her after what happened on Saturday. When Paul didn't show up, she called his cell but received no answer. So, she continued with preparations for Thursday's event. She tried repeatedly to call Bill, but he never picked up. Undeterred, she carried on as if nothing had happened. In the afternoon, she visited the bank to arrange a new credit card and open a new account. She transferred half of the $200,000 into this account. Next, she started looking for a place to live since she couldn't stay in a motel indefinitely. She scheduled several property viewings for the following day and returned to her motel. Tuesday, Bill, we woke up early, had breakfast, and hit the road. I had contacted an employee who had a history with forgery and asked if he knew anyone who could provide us with fake passports. He said he would get back to me. Our destination was Canada, where I had an aunt who I knew would welcome us for a few weeks while I searched for a new place to live. Cindy visited several rental properties and finally decided on a 2-bedroom condo near her gallery. She was scheduled to move in on Wednesday, so she only had one more night at the motel. She called Paul to make sure he would attend the Thursday night event, and he confirmed his attendance. When she inquired about his well-being, he mentioned he was still recovering from the beating he received from Phil and Tom. He also mentioned that Max was still in the hospital but would be released soon. Feeling anxious, Cindy contacted an attorney to force Bill to speak to her and bring the kids back. She made an appointment for Wednesday. Cindy went to her appointment with her attorney and explained her situation and what she wanted. He asked for proof about her affair, and she admitted what she had done. She then asked about the children, and he explained that I hadn't actually broken the law as we were still married, but as soon as the divorce started, I was obliged to tell her where the children were and allow her contact. She said she doubted that I would divorce her as I would lose too much. They then went through our finances, and the attorney said she should be entitled to at least half of everything plus maintenance, and they could use this to force a reconciliation. Cindy then went back to work feeling much better. That afternoon, Cindy moved into her new condo and started making it a home. When she went to bed, she was looking forward to the open day at the gallery tomorrow. Bill contacted about new identities for him, and the children said to send him Head and Shoulders photos and he would take care of the rest. Bill sent the photos and asked how much it would cost so that he would have cash for the transaction. He was told $5K would do the trick, and he would set a time and place for the meeting in a few days. Bill had found another out-of-the-way campsite for a few days and settled in for a short time. Instead of cooking in the RV, he took the children to the nearest town and found an all-you-can-eat restaurant and ate so much that both the children were sick on the way back to the site. Bill went to bed looking forward to Thursday and the surprise waiting for Cindy and her lover. Thursday, Bill continued his road trip towards Canada, stopping only 1 or 2 nights at campsites. He made a short stop at a small town called Sweetwater to visit the engineering company that made the majority of fuel pumps for the construction industry. He made a presentation for his design of a new fuel delivery system. After a short demonstration on how the new system would give their clients increased productivity and reliability, the board unanimously endorsed his design. They offered him $2 million for the patent, but Bill wanted $1 million plus 10 cents on the dollar for the next 10 years. This was agreed, and contracts were signed. Bill also asked that the money be paid into his father's account so that Cindy wouldn't be able to claim it as part of the settlement. Bill then continued his journey to Canada with a stop off at Oregon to meet his contact and pick up his fake identity papers. Cindy woke up at her new address looking forward to the open day at the gallery. She dressed in a business suit, but with fancy garments, hoping to continue her affair with Paul. She spent the entire day at the gallery showing people around and pointing out the various paintings and sculptures. At 7 o'clock, the more important visitors started to arrive, including the mayor and at least one congressman. Paul arrived shortly afterwards and quickly moved her into the back office and locked the door. She returned to the reception and continued playing the hostess, but noticed several people giving her strange looks and wondered if they knew what had just happened. The reception was in full swing when two men in work suits accompanied by two deputy sheriffs entered the gallery. One went over to Paul and asked, "Excuse me, sir, are you Mr. Paul Gauthier?" "Yes, what do you want?" "Mr. Gauthier, you have been served," and handed him a large envelope and walked away. The other man walked over to Cindy. "Are you Mrs. Cindy Grant?" "Yes, you have been served," and handed her a large envelope. The whole room went silent as Paul opened his envelope and discovered that he had been served notice that he was to be sued for alienation of affection. He crumpled up the documents and stormed out. Cindy opened her envelope to find divorce papers inside. She started crying and sat down in the nearest chair. As she sat crying, a deputy sheriff walked over to her and asked, "Are you Mrs. Cindy Grant?" "Yes." And just when she thought things couldn't get any worse, he said, "Mrs. Grant, you are under arrest for a crime." And then he read her rights to her, cuffed her, and led her away. The people gathered there were speechless. The reception then dissolved into chaos, and everybody left. Friday, Paul, after leaving the reception the previous night, Paul called his attorney to report what had happened. His attorney informed him that the case probably wouldn't get to court as no case citing alienation of affection had been proved for many years. However, if Mr. Grant sued the company as being complicit in the said alienation of affection, that was a different matter, as Paul would be in breach of the moral clause forbidding inter-office liaisons. And if such a liaison was to take place on company property and could be proved, it could cost the company a considerable amount of money. Paul thought about this and decided to call an internet board meeting to discuss the problem. When all the board members were present later that night, Paul was surprised that the company had already been served. The company's legal department had seen the evidence, and as Paul himself was seen to admit to having relations with Cindy on company premises at best, they could hope for was to settle out of court. Cindy sat in a cell crying. She had tried to call Paul to no avail, so she tried her parents, who wouldn't pick up, so she tried Norma, who eventually picked up. "Hi Norma, please don't hang up. You're my last hope. Can you please come down to the courthouse and bail me out? What did you do to get arrested?" "I've been arrested for a crime I don't understand why." "Okay, I know you're innocent, so I'll help you out. I'll be down in a couple of hours." Norma called Bill to ask what was going on and if he knew about Cindy's arrest. "Hi Norma, what can I do for you? I just got a call from Cindy. She said she had been arrested for a crime." "Do you know anything about this?" "Yes, if you watch the video, you will see Cindy admit to being paid $200,000 to spend the night with Paul Gauthier. That constitutes a crime, so she has been arrested. She will probably only get a fine and a slap on the wrist, but it will give her a criminal record and ruin her reputation. You hate her that much that you would do this to her? After what she did to me, you bet I would." "Okay, I see your point, but remind me never to be your enemy. Speak to you later." After Bill ended the call, he called his attorney to ask how things were going. When Gary informed Bill about the reception and Cindy's arrest, Bill couldn't stop laughing. When he finally calmed down, he asked about the writ Gary had sent to Gauthier's company and was told they would probably want to settle out of court. Gary told Bill he had sued Paul's company for $10 million, but would probably settle for 3 or 4 as a more realistic sum. Gary said he would call Bill in a few days to let him know the outcome and ended the call. Bill then opened an online gambling account and called his father to ask him to do the same. When his father asked why, Bill explained to his father that they could play online poker in a 2-person private game and his father could lose to him, thus giving him an income outside the tax laws and making it harder to find Bill's money. He also told his father that a large sum would soon be deposited into his account, and would he make sure that the appropriate tax was deducted and the same applied to any other such sums deposited. His father agreed to this as no laws were being broken, only bent a little. Cindy, when Norma bailed Cindy out, she took her to her new home and went inside for a cup of coffee. "Cindy, what on earth were you thinking when you did this to Bill? He's one of the nicest men I have ever met." "Oh shoot, I know. At first, I started being involved with Paul because I thought it was expected of me to keep my job. I don't love him or anything, but I must admit he is great, and I did enjoy it. Then he asked to spend the night with him at his cabin. He wanted to do certain activities with me while Bill was in the next room. He gets off on the idea that the husband of the woman he's involved with can hear everything that goes on. He brings his bodyguard Max to make sure that the husband doesn't try to interfere. This time he got it wrong, and Bill fought back and knocked out Max. I never knew he had it in him. I thought that he would make me go home with him after that, but he didn't. He told me to go and earn the money I had been paid and just left. It never occurred to me that he would react so strongly and take the kids. Do you know where he's gone? Not the slightest clue, and neither does Frank. What will you do now? I'll fight the divorce and try to pressure him to bring the kids back. He took all our money except for what Paul gave me and closed the credit cards. I still have my job, but I don't know for how long. I even confided in Paul the night of the open day to try and keep my job, but I haven't heard from him since. I really care about Bill, but I don't know how to fix this. I don't think you can, and if you keep confiding in Paul, you never will. Snap out of it and start considering how Bill feels about what you tried to do to him and how you would feel if the situation were reversed. If I know Bill, you probably won't see him or the children ever again. You brought this upon yourself, so you better learn to accept it. Do the right thing, sign the divorce papers, and let Bill move on with his life while you do the same. I don't want to move on. I want Bill back, and I want things to go back to the way they were. I only did what I did to earn enough money for us to do all the things we wanted, like renovating the house. I thought that since it was only one night, Bill would get over it and we could continue as if nothing had happened. What reality are you living in? If I had done something like that, Frank would have gone ballistic and probably harmed all of us. You're lucky Bill is so level-headed and is simply divorcing you. Now, if you don't mind, I have a family to take care of, and it's almost time to pick up the kids. Norma then returned home. That night, Norma told Frank about her conversation with Cundy, and after Frank stopped laughing, he told her that if she had done that, they would all probably be in grave danger. Bill drove all day Saturday and Sunday to put as much distance between him and Cindy as possible. On Monday, he stopped at a supermarket and bought 3 new SIM cards to insert into his and the children's phones. They spent the next hour transferring the numbers they wanted to keep and discarded their old SIM cards. Now, only the people they informed about their new numbers could call them. The children also contacted their mother on Twitter to arrange a face-to-face meeting, as their father had instructed. "Hi kids, how are you? I miss you so much. Is Dad there? Can I speak to him? Hi Mom, we're doing okay. Dad is here, but he doesn't want to talk to you and neither do we, but Dad wants us to. He said that you're still our mother and that you love us, but we don't see it that way. As far as we're concerned, you abandoned us just like you did to Dad. Well, we've spoken to you as Dad asked, so goodbye." Monday, Cindy went to work as usual, expecting to hear from Paul. But by the end of the day, Paul still hadn't contacted her, and she was getting worried. Paul's company lawyers offered Gary $2 million to settle the case outside of court. Gary asked for $8 million, and they offered $4 million. Gary then asked for $7 million, and they offered $5 million. Gary accepted the offer, so Bill was now a very wealthy man. The alienation of affection lawsuit against Paul didn't go anywhere, as predicted, but it did serve its purpose in embarrassing Paul during the open day celebrations. The following weeks were uneventful. Cindy continued her attempts to stop the divorce and have the children returned to her, but the authorities and her private investigator couldn't find any trace of them. This was mainly because they were searching for Bill's pickup truck, which was hidden out of sight in the back of Frank's workshop. Bill finally reached Oregon and met his contact to acquire the false documents showing that he and the children were Canadian citizens. After 2 more days of intense driving, Bill reached his aunt's house. It was a spacious 4-bedroom log house with a few acres of land surrounding it, providing them with some privacy. Aunt Mary was overjoyed to see them, as the children hadn't seen her in almost 10 years. There were hugs all around before she led them into the dining room. "Come on, take a seat. I'll whip us up some lunch, and then you can tell me all about it." Bill, after a delicious lunch, which was a refreshing change from the meals on the road, we all sat down to talk. We each shared our side of the story. After we had finished, My aunt looked disgusted and asked us what our plans were now. I explained that I needed to enroll the children back in school so they could complete their education. I also shared my intention to start a new business and find a home nearby. My aunt offered to help settle the children into their new school since she volunteered at the education board. She assured us that we could leave it to her. Then, she showed us to our rooms and left us to unpack. True to her word, Aunt Mary managed to get Mike and Lindy enrolled in the local school, which was only a mile away. The kids quickly adjusted to their new routine and were doing well academically. I registered them under their own names to avoid any complications when they graduated. Weeks later, I examined the local engineering companies to see if there was a specific area where I could contribute without disrupting the local balance. I wanted to enhance the local engineering environment instead of competing with it. I discovered that there were no specialized auto repair and customization facilities within a 30-mile radius, so I purchased a large warehouse on the outskirts of town and began setting it up. I advertised in all the local newspapers and placed an ad with the unemployment agency. I made it clear that I would hire ex-convicts as long as they followed the rules. In the first week, I was flooded with applications, so I started conducting interviews. Initially, I hired 30 people and kept 20 as backups. The local probation service took a keen interest in what I was doing and provided a lot of assistance by sending suitable parolees. When I embarked on this venture, I used my own name to avoid potential problems later on. I maintained contact with my friend Frank and my attorney. My attorney informed me that Cindy was still working at the gallery but had stopped searching for me, and the authorities were no longer concerned about my whereabouts. Cindy was convicted for engaging in illegal activities, but as it was her first offense, she received a $2,000 fine and 3 months of community service. Although she would have a criminal record, the chances of her obtaining custody of our children were very slim. It had been nearly a year since I left the town of Justin, and Christmas was quickly approaching. I realized that there was little risk in bringing the children to my parents' house for the holidays. So, I coordinated with my dad since my mom wouldn't be able to keep it a secret. The entire family would be there, and I also invited my friends Frank and Norma to celebrate Christmas with us. Mike and Lindy were approaching 18 and would be starting their freshman year at Halifax University in the fall. Mike planned to study engineering and computer science, while Lindy intended to pursue law and business studies. I encouraged them to stay in touch with their mother, and a sort of truce seemed to have formed. Their conversations were now longer and more amicable, often ending with both sides saying, "Love you too." I felt that it was time for them to meet their mother and break down the walls between them. To make this happen, I needed to know if Cindy would be spending the Christmas holidays at her parents' house. So I asked Norma to find out for me. When I asked Norma, she was delighted that we would be visiting and that the children would have a chance to see their mother. She said that Cindy frequently asked about any news regarding the three of us and seemed genuinely remorseful about her actions. Thanks to the sale of my last 2 patents, I was now quite wealthy. My new business continued to thrive, employing over 70 individuals, with more than half of them being ex-convicts. My annual pre-tax income exceeded $2 million and continued to rise. As a token of my gratitude to my aunt for all she had done for us, I paid off her mortgage and invited her to accompany us to visit her sister. She hugged me tightly, making it hard for me to breathe. I realized that we might want to spend more time in our old town, so we would need a more permanent place to stay. With this in mind, I asked my dad if he would be willing to build a new house for me on the site of the old one. He readily agreed, and I sent him the plans for my new home, which he said would be ready by the following summer. As the holiday approached, I arranged for a private jet to fly us to the nearest airport and a limousine to transport us to my parents' front door. The limo would be at our disposal throughout the holiday. The driver was a single man with no family obligations, so he didn't mind working over the holiday period. I booked a room for him at the Holiday Inn Hotel, where he could operate from. The day before Christmas Eve, we boarded the plane at 9 a.m. and arrived at my parents' house around 2 p.m. My mom went wild with excitement when she saw us and almost smothered the children and my aunt, whom she hadn't seen in over 12 years. When my mom found out that the driver would be alone on Christmas Day, she insisted that he join us for dinner and stay for tea. I thought I saw a tear in his eye, but he quickly turned away. I'm sure that if we had the space, my mom would have insisted that he stay with us. Christmas Eve and Christmas Day were the most memorable in recent years. We all indulged in a bit too much to drink and dozed off after dinner, even the driver. Norma informed me that Cindy would be at her parents' house for Christmas, so I arranged for the driver to pick up Mike, Lindy, and me after breakfast on Boxing Day. We drove to Cindy's parents' home and arrived just in time for the midday meal. Someone spotted the limo pulling into their driveway, and Trevor hurriedly walked down to greet us before the limo even came to a halt. My driver, noticing the upscale property we were entering and correctly assessing Trevor as a pretentious snob, swiftly put on his chauffeur's cap and jumped out of the limo, opening the door and standing at attention as I stepped out. Trevor's face was somewhere between disbelief and shock. As Mike and Lindy exited the limo, he smiled and embraced them. Then, he looked at me and extended his hand, which I happily shook. "Bill, it's wonderful to see you, and I'm so glad the children are here. Would you like to join us for lunch? It's just about ready." "I heard that Cindy is here. Is the invitation still open? If not, I can leave the children here, and I'll pick them up later. Let me check." "Just a moment." While he went inside, I approached my driver. "Thank you for that. You read the situation perfectly." The driver beamed at me. "Been there, done that. I know his type. I've seen it 100 times. Just then, Trevor returned. "Bill, you are more than welcome to stay. Please come in." I took out my wallet and removed 2 $100 bills and gave them to the driver. "We passed a hotel a while back. Go get yourself something to eat and relax. I'll call you when it's time to go." I watched as the limo pulled out of the drive and drove away and thought, what have I let myself in for? We entered the house, took off our outside clothes, and went into the family room. Linda rushed over to the children and tried to hug them tightly. I thought I heard their ribs crack. She then came over to me and gave me a hug. "Thank you for bringing my grandchildren to see us. We've missed them so much." I looked over at Cindy, who was embracing the children, who were embracing back but with less enthusiasm. When she let them go, she looked at me and said, "Thank you, Bill. This is the best present. Of all, I know what you think, but I really have missed them." She then came over to me and hugged me, then went and sat down again. The conversation was a bit stiff at first but warmed up as we went along until we were comfortable with each other. Cindy told the children about her job and where she lived and hoped they would visit in their summer break, but no promises were made. After lunch, which consisted of Christmas leftovers and some new rolls followed by brandy and coffee, Cindy asked me if we could have a private chat, and I agreed. We took our coffee into the library and sat opposite each other and just looked at each other before we spoke. I was surprised that I no longer felt any animosity towards Cindy. In fact, I felt nothing at all. I looked meaningfully at Cindy and asked, "So, Bill, I've been wanting to talk to you for so long about what happened, and now I don't know what to say except I'm really sorry, and I wish it had never happened. I have no excuses. I was just a selfish person who hurt you more than I realized at the time. I won't ask for your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I know you tried to keep a connection between me and the children, and I thank you for that. I know we can never be together again, but I beg you, could we at least be friends? Cindy, I didn't come here for your apology, but I accept it, and as for forgiveness, you have it. I'm not sure about friendship. We will have to see how things go, but the children have forgiven you, so you have a chance to rebuild your relationship with them. I have never disrespected you to them. They made their own choices, and you have to live with that, but don't let this opportunity pass you by. I will help in any way I can, but it will take time. I still haven't forgiven Gauthier, and I'll get my revenge eventually. I loved you more than life itself and would have gladly died for you, and you threw it all away for Gauthier and his money. So, was it worth it? No, Bill, it wasn't, and I have regretted it every day the moment I wake up each day. I cry myself to sleep most nights, and the rest of the time I drink myself to oblivion just to forget. There has been no one else since we parted, and I don't think there ever will be. You're a tough act to follow. And as for Paul Gauthier, you obviously don't know, but he's dead. He was killed about 3 months ago. He pulled the same stunt with another couple at his cabin. Only this time the husband was an ex-military special forces. He killed Max, then shot his wife between the eyes. And according to the 2 couples he had there as witnesses who he let go, he shot Paul in both knees, elbows, and ankles. He then set the cabin on fire and left Paul to burn to death. The four witnesses said they could hear the screams in their cars even with the windows closed. So, you see, there's no revenge to be had there. What happened to the husband? He disappeared into the woods and hasn't been seen since. The police said with his training they would probably never find him. Mike came into the room and asked if it would be okay if he and Lindy stayed at Grand's for a few days. I agreed for them to stay another 2 nights, then I would send the car for them. Cindy said she would be happy to drop them off on her way home if it was all right with me. I hadn't seen Cindy's car outside, only an old sedan, so I asked where her car was. Oh, I had to sell the car. I needed the money. That old sedan is all I can afford, but Frank looks after it for me, so it's pretty dependable. Okay, Cindy, if you don't mind. Mom and Dad would probably like to see you anyway, so I'll see you in a couple of days. I phoned the driver to pick me up and said my goodbyes. Trevor and Linda said for me not to be a stranger and hoped to see me again soon. I went outside to wait for my ride, and as I stood there, Cindy came and stood next to me. How about you, Bill? Is there anyone special in your life? Well, not that it's any of your business, but no, I haven't been with anyone since you. I just haven't felt the need. Well, here comes my ride. Goodbye, Cindy. On the way home, I called Frank and made a purchase to be delivered the following day. When I got home, I explained that Cindy would bring the kids home in a couple of days, and would they please be nice to Cindy for the kids' sake. My sister made a rude gesture but promised to be good and not harm Cindy just yet. At my ex-in-law's house the next day, there was a knock on the door. Linda answered the door, and there was Frank standing there. Hello, Frank. What are you doing here? Bill at his mother's place. I'm not here to see Bill. I would like to see Cindy, if that's okay. Cindy came to the door and asked Frank what he wanted. Hi, Cindy. I have a delivery for you from Bill. He motioned her to come outside, and there on the drive stood a 2-year-old brand new SUV with a ribbon tied over the roof. Noema had just finished tying the ribbon and gave Cindy an envelope. Inside was a Christmas card, and written inside was, "For old time's sake." Signed, Bill. Cindy threw her arms around Norma and just cried, then managed to whisper, "Does this mean he still cares? I wouldn't place a bet on it, but it sure looks like he might." When Cindy took the children back to her ex-in-laws, she was greeted with the warmth of the season and invited to stay for tea. There was a decided chill to the reception Karen gave her, but true to her word, she kept a civil tongue in her head. As Bill, Mike, and Lindy went outside to say goodbye to Cindy, she threw her arms around Bill, hugged him, and thanked him for her car, then left. Mike and Lindy gave Bill a knowing look, but Bill said, "Don't read anything into that. We are just working on being friends for your sake." A week later, they returned to Canada. Mike and Lindy went back to school, and things returned to normal. Mike was thinking that he should make sure he and the children should see more of his and Cindy's parents, but keep hiring a private jet was a waste of money. If he had his own aircraft, it would be useful for his business and personal life, so he started looking into buying an aircraft to seat up to 8 persons. He finally settled on a Cessna 425 and put in an order, and decided that having a full-time pilot would be a waste as he wouldn't be needed that often, and he didn't like the idea of hiring one as he wouldn't know anything about him. So the alternative was to learn to fly himself. 8 months later, he had a multi-engine pilot's license for all-weather flying. This meant that he could fly at night, as darkness was counted as a weather condition. The following summer, Bill's father called to let him know that the house was ready. Bill flew home commercial as he had not yet finished his pilot training. He stayed at his parents' home and asked his mother if she would help him choose the furniture for his new home. She said she would be happy to do so, but it would be better if a younger woman helped him. Perhaps Cindy would help. He knew what his mother was up to, but agreed to her suggestion and phoned Cindy, who agreed enthusiastically. Bill hired a car and picked Cindy up from her condo, and they went about the task of completely refurnishing the house. The house had 5 bedrooms, reception room, kitchen, dining room, and a large family room. A basement which Bill would use as his office man cave with a 2-bed-in-law apartment above the garage. It also included a pool and a separate workshop. Cindy was in her element, rushing from shop to shop, trying to make sure everything was aesthetically pleasing and coordinated with everything else. Cindy asked if she could see the house, and when Bill showed her around, she loved it. He showed her the in-law apartment and asked what she thought about it. "It's lovely, Bill, but we didn't buy any furnishings for it. We'll have to go out again later in the week." "Why didn't you tell me about the apartment?" "Well, Cindy, it's like this. I will be splitting my time between here and my company in Canada. I don't want the house empty when I'm away, so I thought I would ask you if you would like to live in this apartment rent-free and keep an eye on the house while I'm away. You would have full run of the property and use of the pool area. That way we would be doing each other a favor and you could save for your own place instead of renting. I'll even throw in an allowance for the extra fuel for your extra mileage to and from work. What do you think? I think that's a lovely idea, Bill. Thank you so much, but why are you being so kind to me after what I did to you? First the car and now a place to live? I don't deserve it? Cindy, I have already told you that I forgive you and we have our children in common. It would be nice if, when they come to stay, you could be nearby. And to be totally honest, I still care about you, even though I've tried not to. Before you say anything, I'm not looking for us to get back together. I have forgiven you, but I can't forget what happened. Do you think we can be friends for the sake of the children? Bill, I love you too, and I would do anything to have you back in my life, even if it's just as a friend. I'll take that as a yes then. Will you take the apartment? Yes, I'll take the apartment, if only to be near you. In that case, we better go shopping to furnish it. You can choose anything you want. It's your apartment. Furnish it however you like. Since there wasn't anything in the house, not even a coffee machine, we made a beeline to Casey's Eatery for some much-needed nourishment. As we were drinking our coffee after a delicious steak meal, I noticed Cindy was softly crying. Cindy, what's wrong? I thought you were happy helping me furnish the house. Did I do something to upset you? Silly man, I'm just a little sad thinking this could have been ours instead of yours if I hadn't been so stupid and selfish. I'm also crying because I'm so happy being in your company and enjoying a simple meal out. I haven't been to a restaurant since the last time you took me out, and I'm enjoying myself so much I never want it to end. I looked at Cindy and put my hand over hers, giving it a gentle squeeze. We'll do this again soon, I promise. And maybe next time, we can even go dancing to really round off the evening. If that's okay with you. I would like that very much. Just let me know when. Over the next few weeks, we spent time together, going out and even dancing a couple of times. I found myself feeling content in Cindy's presence, and it felt almost like old times. However, whenever she tried to take things further, I hesitated. I couldn't get the image of her betraying me out of my head, and it was too painful. Eventually, I made the decision to return to Canada. Cindy, these past few weeks have been some of the happiest I've had since our divorce, and I'm feeling conflicted about our relationship. Every time I get close to you, I can't help but picture what you did with him. And it brings back all the pain. I need some time to sort out my feelings about you and decide what to do, if anything. So I'm going back to Canada. I also need to show my face there occasionally. I understand what you're saying. Just let me know when you arrive safely, and please keep in touch. The next morning, I caught a flight back to Canada and returned to work. When I arrived at the office, I noticed that my tray was empty. I asked my assistant if there was anything that needed my attention, and she informed me that everything had already been taken care of. She had efficiently run the company in my absence, leaving me with nothing to do. I immersed myself in learning to fly. With Christmas approaching, we decided to spend it at my new home. It would be me, Mike, Lindy, and my aunt traveling. I would fly us to the nearest airport, and a rental car would meet us there for the rest of the journey. As before, the same driver met us at the arrival gate with a limo. When we pulled up outside the new home, Cindy rushed out to greet us and hugged everyone. Mike and Lindy exchanged knowing smiles when Cindy hugged me tightly and didn't let go for a long time. The next morning, we drove over to my mom's place for a Christmas Eve dinner. On Christmas Day, Cindy's parents joined us after breakfast and stayed for dinner. It was as if the last few years never happened. A few days later, I had to visit an attorney regarding a business acquisition I was interested in. It turned out that this acquisition would take several weeks, so I had to stay in town until it was completed. However, Mike and Lindy needed to return to university before I could leave, so they flew back on a commercial flight with my Aunt Mary. After waving them off, Cindy and I returned to my parents' home. We spent the evening watching the snow fall in the garden while enjoying a bottle of wine. We didn't say much, just enjoying each other's company in comfortable silence. When it got too dark to see outside, we decided to go to bed. We didn't say anything, just silently went up to the master bedroom, undressed, and got into bed. I noticed tears streaming down Cindy's face and leaned forward to wipe them away. She pulled me close, and we shared a deep hug for the first time in over 2 years. I suddenly had a vivid flashback of her betrayal, and it was too much. My desire disappeared, and I couldn't continue. "Baby, what's wrong?" Cindy asked, looking up at me. "I'm sorry, Cindy. I just can't. All I see is that memory, and it brings back all the pain." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. Can we just snuggle and go to sleep?" "I'm sorry too." "Let's get some sleep, and we can talk about it in the morning." The next morning, I woke up and found the bed empty. I could smell breakfast cooking, so I went downstairs and saw Cindy, dressed in a t-shirt, cooking bacon and eggs. After breakfast, she went to work, and I went to my meeting to discuss the business deal. I spent the rest of the day with Frank, sharing what had happened the previous night. He suggested we see a counselor to work through our issues, and also mentioned how happy he and Norma would be if Cindy and I got back together. That night, Cindy and I sat down and talked about the previous night, agreeing that counseling might help us. She asked about my meeting, but I couldn't share the details at that moment. When we went to bed together, we cuddled briefly before falling asleep in each other's arms. I was still confused and angry with Cindy, but I also felt something pulling us back together, and it gave me a sense of comfort. Over the next few weeks, we continued with our counseling sessions and found them helpful in understanding our own emotions and addressing the pain Cindy had caused me. After one counseling session, Cindy came out looking worried. She told me that her gallery had been bought out and new management would be taking over. They planned to expand the gallery by adding the neighboring building, which meant the current gallery would be closed during the renovation period. All staff would still be paid, but Cindy would be home for the foreseeable future. That's when I suggested that she join me on a trip to Canada to see the factory I had built and stay at my other home. She was excited to leave, so we informed everyone of our plans and made arrangements for the following Saturday. Her parents drove us to the airport and were impressed by my aircraft. We said our goodbyes and boarded the plane. Cindy sat in the co-pilot seat, full of wonder and excitement like a kid on her first flight. As we flew over the lake where Gauthier's cabin was located, we couldn't spot it from our altitude. However, about 20 minutes later, the temperature gauge warning light for one of the engines started flashing and beeping. I shut down the engine and made a mayday call, searching for the nearest airfield. Although I wasn't too worried since the plane could still fly on one engine, things took a turn for the worse when the other engine also failed. I restarted the first engine, which continued to overheat, and now I was desperately searching for a safe place to land. I instructed Cindy to go to the back of the plane for safety, but she refused to move. Smoke started billowing from the faulty engine. Just as I was about to give up hope, I saw a long strip of clear land amidst the forest below. It was a scrubland with no trees that we could potentially land on. I made the decision to perform a belly landing to prevent the wheels from snagging and causing the plane to flip over. We touched down at a slight upward angle, ensuring that the nose wouldn't dig into the ground and cause the plane to cartwheel. There was a tremendous noise and sensation as we skidded across the ground, but miraculously, we managed to avoid the trees. However, our wings were torn off by the impact, igniting the fuel in them. In the chaos, I caught a glimpse of a tree right in front of us before everything went black. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but as I opened my eyes, my first thought was of Cindy. I looked to my right, but she wasn't there, only an empty seat. My head hurt like crazy, and so did my left leg. I must have drifted off again because when I opened my eyes, I was out in the open with a rather ragged-looking man looking down at me. "Try to stay still. You have a broken leg and a nasty lump on your head. You're lucky to be alive." I managed to croak out one word. "Cindy. She's in better shape than you. She has a dislocated shoulder and some bumps and bruises, but other than that she's fine." I drifted off again. When I woke up, there was Cindy looking down at me, bathing my head with a cloth. "Oh my goodness, I'm glad you're awake. I was so worried about you, but Peter said you would be fine. He set your leg, so don't try to move it. He has it in splints. He's gone back to the plane to see if he can salvage anything. How are you feeling? You look terrible." "I feel awful. How long was I out?" 2 days. "Have you seen any evidence of a search party?" "No, and Peter won't let me light a signal fire." "Why?" He wouldn't say. Then a voice behind us said, "It's because I'm on the run." I killed 3 people, and I've been hiding ever since." I thought about what he said, and it hit me. He was the ex-Green Beret who killed his wife Max and Paul Gauthier. You killed your wife Gauthier and his bodyguard Max, didn't you? What do you know about it? That jerk pulled the same stuff on us a few years ago, and I put Max in the hospital. It ruined our marriage, but we are working on getting back together. I was flying us to my home in Canada to work on it. Why didn't you just stop him like I did? It would have saved me a lot of trouble. In some ways, I wish I had, but I'm not a killer. I fight, yes, but I've never killed anyone. I thought the beating he got would have changed his ways, but I was wrong. I'm sorry your life was ruined, and I am partly responsible, but I think I might be able to help you out of your present situation. How do you propose to do that? My description is everywhere. Let me think about it. I'm sure we can come up with something. After a few weeks, I could walk with a stick and my head no longer hurt all the time, so we started to make our way back to civilization. During the whole time we were missing, we never saw any sign of a search taking place. Peter said we were about 500 yards from the road, and he would leave us to get there on our own. I asked him if he would see us all the way there, as I had an idea. When we reached the road, I told Peter to mark a tree so that we could find it again. I said to give it a week and then come back to this spot every Sunday after dark, and I would help him leave the country. He agreed to my idea and said he would do as I asked. He then said goodbye and left us there. After about an hour, we managed to flag down a car and explain who we were. The driver was an off-duty deputy sheriff, and he took us straight to the hospital. Of course, the media were all over us, and we were famous for a few days. Our parents came to see us, and we had a face-to-face conversation with our children on social media. A week later, we were discharged and went home. When the sheriff asked us how we survived, we explained that we were helped by a ragged old man who said he had lived in the forest all his life. This explanation seemed to satisfy the sheriff, and he left. The next Sunday, I drove to the pickup point and parked at the side of the road. A few minutes later, Peter climbed into the car, and we set off back home. When we arrived home, the first thing Peter wanted was a shower. When he came down, Cindy prepared him his first proper meal since he left the cabin. We moved Peter into the apartment above the garage, and if anyone asked, he was employed as the caretaker and gardener. We continued this false story for the next couple of months. In the meantime, the gallery was finished, and there was a grand opening planned for the following Saturday. Cindy was a bit nervous as she would be meeting her new boss for the first time. Saturday came, and I had to tell Cindy that I would not be able to attend because I had an emergency meeting about the property I had acquired. She was upset, but she didn't make a big deal out of it like the old Cindy would have. That night, Cindy was waiting outside the gallery with about 100 people, including our parents, the media, and some important people. As the Bentley pulled to a stop outside the gallery, the doorman opened the door to let out the new owner. I stepped out of the Bentley to see Cindy's shocked face and our family's grins on the deception. I walked over to Cindy and gave her the certificate of ownership made out to her. The gallery's new owner was Cindy. That night was the first night we spent together without any issues. We were back on track. The following week, I took possession of a new Cessna after being cleared of all responsibility for the crash. During the investigation, it was found that the fuel was contaminated, but luckily, mine was the only aircraft fueled from that source. I hadn't lost contact with my former friends, so getting a false passport and Canadian documentation was not a problem. Once they were delivered, I made plans to return to my home in Canada. Cindy was too busy decorating the new gallery with sculptures and paintings to come with us, so Peter and I left alone. When we arrived at my Canadian home, I asked Peter what he wanted to do for the rest of his life. He said he didn't have a clue, but he did have a degree in business management that he could no longer use due to his old name. I suggested he go back to school and requalify in Canada, and I would offer him a job. Now, 8 years later, I have moved back to my home in the US permanently. Peter passed his degree in business management and married a kind, divorced woman with 2 children whom he loves dearly. I gave him my old house, and he now runs the company I built. Cindy and I have 3 grandchildren whom we adore. We now live together in the same house as partners, although we are not married and have no plans to do so. After a lot of troubles, life is finally good.